Start with Myra.
Downstairs, I was taking a sip of water and they were doing introductions. Sorry. My name is Hal Robinson, Sitsi. I'm the director of the Aboriginal Education Directorate, Manitoba Education, Advanced Learning.
We're live? Okay.
I'm Myra Laramie. I'm Aboriginal Awareness Consultant for Aboriginal Education Directorate, Manitoba Education and Advanced Learning.
Hi, John Thompson, a social science teacher at Gillilangs Collegiate in Riverview Transform.
Carol Wickstrom Street, social sciences teacher, Miles Macdonald Collegiate, Riverview Transcone.
Good morning, Yolande Dupuis. I'm a trustee with Division Scolaire Francophone Quebec.
Anne Cresta, I'm an inclusive education consultant with Education Solutions Manitoba.
Carol Billick, Manitoba Education and Advanced Learning.
Krista Erickson, I'm a trustee with Rolling River School Division. I'm Gary Hunter, teacher educator, adult education teacher.
And I'm Donna Kaufman-Gay from the University of Winnipeg.
And Ken Clark with the Assessment Unit at the Department of Education.
Okay, good morning everyone. My name is Roy Sidler. I'm the Executive Director with the Manitoba Association of School Business Officials. I'm going to introduce Barry this morning. When I went to speak to him just before, because I'd met him before to get a little information, and I looked at the title of his topic, which was Creating Learning Spaces, I immediately asked him if he knew the maintenance supervisor in Hanover School Division, because from my perspective, I'm thinking maintenance spaces, physical spaces. He's going to talk to us more about emotional spaces and about the opportunities for students to do a lot of self-selecting in terms of their own education. So that's it. I'm going to give you Barry, teacher, at talk about his program at Landmark Collegiate in Hanover School Division.
Great, thank you very much. All right. Hi. My name is Barry, and I'm addicted to learning. One of my favorite words is why. I annoyed many teachers, some professors, even had one in my master's program tell me in the middle of class to F off because I was just complicating things. But the benefit, at least, of asking why is that you get to figure things out. And it involves some kind of change in you. And I actually love change. I'm one of those early adapters for as many things as you can think. I've changed a great deal since I began my teaching career over 25 years ago. One thing I've always had is a strong desire to make learning relevant for my students. Okay, when I was lecturing for an hour on Who Has Seen the Wind and explaining every metaphor and simile, probably not, but I've at least learned from then. I was that teacher and that was given the bad kids because I was told, you can handle them. And I thought, handle them? They're great kids. I didn't see what there was about handling. For me, handling them meant simply getting to know them and finding out who they were and what it is that they did, not just in school, but outside of school. So as an English teacher, I grew from being a lecturer to a co-learner. And throughout my 25 years, I've given students a lot of choice in what it is that they do. My current passion, going on 5 years now, has been to create a learning environment and community where learners are able to discover themselves as they pursue their own learning interests and passions, as they collaborate and share their learning with others. In my professional teaching experience, we've had a lot of conversation about what teachers should be doing to students. The focus is predominantly about delivering knowledge, as if it's a thing that we can transfer, and then we measure how much has been retained in this transfer. That's the predominant construct of learning and, by extension, education. In this story of education, teachers prepare lessons and they deliver content through those lessons, and the students receive the content through the lessons. Teachers work very hard to do this, and they in one sense do it well. They're experts in their field, and they work hard to remain current in what it is that they do. They do want their students to succeed in life, and they care about their students, and they work very hard to do that with all of the demands that are placed on them. But what are the traditional measures of success that are used here? Number one, grades. The second thing usually that comes along with that is at least some kind of compliance or cooperative behavior. The growing story of education, or more specifically learning, says that the students and what the students need and their learning interests should be at the center of learning. So we're kind of caught between these stories right now. what I know at least about teaching and learning as being in the Special Over 50 Club is that learning is exceedingly complex. Language, and I'll hopefully explain that throughout this talk. At the time when this program was being offered, I was trying to find a topic for my thesis, and I'm like, yes, it just landed in my lap. So of course I jumped at the chance to find another way to approach learning. So from that initial offering, in our school, I had a great principal at the time, and he was, both of us, when we're looking at the idea of alternative, we weren't thinking that typical idea alternative, like looking, oh, we're going to find all the at-risk kids and put them all together and form some kind of group like that, as we know very quickly becomes stigmatized. So we said what we're going to do is we're going to start something for any student. And we simply asked teachers, who do you think would benefit from doing learning differently? And so we invited those students and their parents into a little town hall in the library. And we simply said to them, hey, we want to try to do learning differently. And we explained some ideas about what inquiry learning looks like and so on. But ultimately said, this is an experiment. Will you give us your kids and try this? And so somewhere around 12 said, sure, we'll try that. So we sat down with those parents and those students individually and mapped out, at least initially, what kind of a learning plan they wanted. So that's sort of how year one started, and that's sort of the basis of the thesis that I did on that year. The students who started in that first year, they took a number of classes with me. We worked together. The courses like pre-cal, applied chemistry, that they still did in the regular classroom. So they were moving back and forth. The general model of learning that we were working from as a bit of a template was, as we've heard this morning, the Met School, if you're familiar with that. Big Picture Learning, that's Dennis Litke and Elliot Washer. There's only one school in Canada, and that's the Garden City one. But their idea is simply one student at a time, and we did what they did, and we started with one question, and the question was, what do you want to learn? And we use that as a place to start. So we're drawing out from what's in the student, what their desire is. Now, of course, having taught at that time, I'd already been teaching 22 years. And as you heard, I was at the beginning teaching in a very traditional manner of just lecturing, kind of like I'm doing now. And that, to make this shift all of a sudden, I noticed the first thing I had to do, and it seemed counterintuitive, I had to essentially, what I say is like sit on my hands. I had to stop the doing. And the other thing I had to do was stop my mouth and start listening. So listening, observing, and seeing what are the students doing when we've made a bit of a plan and now they're sort of left on their own. How do you get out of the way and not intervene? Because sometimes I would intervene and I'd be like, oh, okay, that's me trying to put an idea into your head, and you already had an idea, so I had to step back from that. The students were engaged, but without a line to follow this, a curriculum and a plan made by someone else, and with a flexible schedule. We were okay with time throughout the day and what they were doing throughout the day. I began to think, this is just pure chaos. This is so complex. But again, rather than go to my filing cabinet or to my computer, I said, chaos, complexity. Okay, I'm going to go there. I'm going to look at chaos and complexity and learning. And so that's what I did. And by doing that, I found guys like George Siemens and Stephen Downes and their work on connectivism and ideas about what it means to just a different way of thinking about knowledge and thinking about learning. And I won't go into an explanation of that right now. And then eventually I found Deleuze and Guattari and David Cormier's work on rhizomatic learning, which again, if you're thinking of grassroots, and if you're thinking about a rhizome, like an aspen grove, that is, the largest organism, there's no beginning, there's no end. It just keeps going, and you can break off those lovely weeds in your garden and throw them away, and they still come up and grow. All in all, it was pretty exciting. Now, if I was to pick a seminal moment in that first year, there's probably more than one. I'll at least share two. The struggle was, of course, trying to meet this idea that we had of saying, hey, what do you want to learn? And on the other side, it was like, great, you want to learn that? This is the credit for that. We got to find the outcomes for that. We got to match your learning to these outcomes. And of course, by the end of October, I'm thinking, I've got report cards next month. What am I going to do with these kids? Because they've sort of been just going off on their own. So I pulled them together in a little meeting and said, okay, guys, I'm kind of concerned about, these outcomes and all that. And they looked at me and they said, you said we could learn whatever we wanted to. And my response was, of course, yeah. And then I stopped and went, psst. What happened was they had taken ownership already of their learning. And so I had to, again, just step back and say, you're right, I have to step back. It's their learning now. And throughout that year, and probably still continuing, to struggle with that, meeting some other notion of what it means to learn or what's expected and what the learners expect and want of themselves. Here's another highlight of a student from that first year. So if you can picture this, this is the year before. He wasn't in the program. Grade 10. This is the kid sitting at the back of the class, snoozing. And he's snoozing because he's bored, but the second reason is that he's a dairy farmer. And so he's up at 4 or 5 in the morning. And so to sit in a classroom where he's inactive was extremely boring. He was ready to drop out of school after that grade 10 year. But when we offered them a chance and said, well, what do you want to learn? It was not difficult for him to say, I want to learn how to be a dairy and crop farmer. So we took that desire and wish and built his entire year on that. So he spent the whole day working with me, and he, how could we say, this is a young man who was below reading level, struggled with reading, struggled greatly with spelling, who all of a sudden was reading technical documents on different corn varieties, different insects and herbicides and you name it, like for hours a day. Printing off documents, highlighting them, making lists of things. It's like, who is this kid? There's some major shift happened there. We connected with a local agronomist, and he was gracious enough to give us the spreadsheets he uses with the farmers. And so a big part of his plan was he made up an imaginary farm and created, what do we need for the capital? What do we need for, cost inputs, yields, the entire thing. He tracked plant growth. He went to trade shows. It got to the point, he was driving his father crazy because all of a sudden now he's asking his father questions about this and that and the other thing. And actually his father told me, this was maybe October, November that first year, he said, I had to tell the guy to stop working. He just worked all weekend long. He wouldn't stop working. So there was a kid who was transformed. And the only thing we did was say, hey, what do you want to learn? It's a pretty easy shift, actually. All right, let me take you into the thesis then that came out of this work. And are there any questions or anything yet?
I was wondering what kinds of things were the kids doing as they were, identifying areas they wanted to learn about. Could you give us a few?
All right. Women in ancient Greece and comparing it to today. A student who was very interested in Africa and was interested in all kinds of social justice issues. Some students who just wanted to write, to do creative writing. One student who actually wasn't physically in the building. This is a very unique student. He was living in a little shack. It was an old, basically tool shed. He turned into a place to live, and he was out in the Whiteshell and reading about, Thoreau and all kinds of amazing things, and making moccasins, and he could name every bird that flew by, and the trees and leaves and so on, right? So, and this is a guy he was a grade 12 student. Again, it was an amazing transformation. He ended up doing calculus is one thing he still needed, but he didn't want to come into the school, so he learned it himself. He said he only did like 3 out of 5 units, but he passed the provincial exam fine. It's better than some of the kids who are actually in the classroom. So,
just a quick question, because you mentioned the outcomes and having, how did you actually assess then and report? Because from did your school have certain expectations of
So there are members of the Department of Education here. So close your ears. What do you see on a report? What do you see on a report card?
Well, I'm just thinking, in our division, we have to use outcome-based assessments now. And we have to,
absolutely, right.
So I'm just wondering.
So, I think even when we pushed that question to the superintendents, they always said, "We trust you. We trust your professional judgment,"
Okay.
right? Because we were struggling with that.
somebody
We were
kind of-
struggling with that all the time, and they said, "We trust you."
They let you kind
Well,
of
so
go with it.
so it'd be the idea, or what you're looking for was project completion, and they're given credit if they completed the project, or was there?
If they completed, you know what? Let me get into some of the stuff here, and then I think we'll get to that. Go ahead.
The outcome-based business. I think if you let people learn what they want to learn, it's our task to take what they've learned and connect it to the outcomes, not connect them and what they did to the outcomes. Connect their, I don't know if I'm saying it right, but what I do when I work with people who are trying to use Aboriginal perspectives to build a unit, for example, I get them to think about doing the unit without looking at the outcomes at all. And then afterwards, in Nichimakwa, the teachers have their outcome book, Math, Social Studies, Language, Arts, Science, the Aboriginal Cultural WNCP document. They have those. After they've done the unit, they go themselves and look through, what is it that I've covered? What outcomes have I covered by doing this unit? And one of the things that we found there was that teachers were actually covering way more outcomes than had they gone to the outcomes first and planned their unit from the outcome. They're also giving credibility to the Aboriginal perspective because the math is coming in there, science, social stuff. So it's like you remind me when you ask the kids, what do you want to learn? It's that business of our job is to connect to the outcomes. They just do the learning.
Mm-hmm.
They're free to do the learning. And it's a different kind of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So I really identify with asking that question. What do you want to learn?
Mm-hmm. Okay. The challenges I've already said. Well, said that conflict between what the student wants and what some other curriculum wants. But the challenge of doing this is you actually have to do it. You can't talk about it or theorize about it or watch a video about it. You actually have to do it in order to find out what it's like. So in approaching it, I started at least with a new framework, and that was, of course, students first, embrace the cultural change in practice, have to think about how we assess differently. Still not sure that I've solved that. And Sir Ken Robinson's idea of like take on a revolution is certainly something that I bought into. I think the study that I did is significant because it at least shows that I'm at least one of those research educators who's willing to take risks to try to find a different way to go about doing learning. In terms of scope, well, at least it's my experience and my understanding within that particular setting, and I'm sharing it, and I hope that people will find something within that experience. The lens that I used as a practitioner researcher was inquiry. So that's my stance, inquiry is stance. And Cochrane, Smith and Little, for them that is, you're working within a situation, within a system, while simultaneously working against that system. And it's a bit frustrating, but that's what you're doing. So you don't want to support the system, but you can't totally destroy it. Anyways, that's the struggle, and continues to be the struggle. Yeah. So at least the things in the environment were taking an inquiry learning model, using interdisciplinary student-teacher developed curriculum. We worked on that, what we're going to do together. It was at least in that first year, grades 11 and 12, and the students were at least offered the opportunity to go do learning outside. So like the Met School model, they go out on Tuesdays and Thursdays and they find a place within the community to do some work. Very few students took advantage of that, partly because of the problem of the way it's structured. They still had to do some of the regular courses. So particularly those in grade 12 who were looking for scholarships and so on, they just didn't want to take that risk. I'm just doing a very brief bit of the thesis bit here. In reviewing the literature, I did at least look at, if I'm doing something different, I thought I need to see what others have done with alternative programs, or what does this mean, alternative schools, and what exists out there. And then we'll look at some of the other things later. Looking at alternative programs, one of the things that came out in the literature is that, first of all, there isn't very much literature on it. Hasn't been a whole lot of research on it, but one thing is clear is that the programs rise and they die. And they usually die because they're based on the human resources. There isn't a deeper structure that's involved in those things. Some of the good things that at least came out of those programs is they were focused on the student, because very often they were programs, they were either pull-out program trying to get the kids to get a few credits, get them back in a system, or it was a complete separate program, at least trying to work the kids towards graduation. So it was at least focused on the individual learner. When it came to alternative schools, I was looking at Sudbury, Montessori, Waldorf. I did visit both the Met School in Rhode Island. A couple of times I've been to Garden City, and I got to visit a free school in Manhattan, which is now called the Agile Learning Center. And free democratic schools are essentially schools where students have to show up, but they're allowed to do whatever they want all day long. Teachers are there and they will offer them some teaching if they want, but otherwise they're free to do what it is that they want. So that's quite the other end of the spectrum, which is, at least it was an interesting thing to look at and to reflect on as I was working on developing some kind of an idea of what we wanted for a learning environment. So three key ideas that I was working with. Number one is a pedagogy of care, and this is from Nell Nodding's work. Constructivist idea of learning, and student-centered learning. Those are the three things that sort of fed in. Student just made this comment last week. No teacher who respects their students would make them mindlessly learn. And I said, oh, you've been reading Noddings, have you? Because what Nodding says is if you have to enter into caring relations with the students. And when you do that and you care about the students, you're going to think about what it is that you're actually doing with them, and it's going to change what you do. And I couldn't agree more. In practice, Nodding says, you know, you have to model that care. Has to be lots of open, honest dialogue. Students have to be provided opportunities to practice care, which means working in community or working with others. And obviously our job is to, again, draw out from the students what do they have and pull out the best out of them. Constructivist learning, that's a tough one. If you're doing the inquiry-based ideas of learning and trying to create meaning, it's not linear, it is chaotic, and to plan for it requires a whole lot of time and effort. A reminder that, of course, it is just a learning theory. The action is in, whether it's project-based, problem-based, learning by design, many different models of looking at it. Student-centered learning, for me, that's about the personalizing of the what they're doing. Why am I asking them to do this particular thing? And then how am I asking them or allowing them to go about doing that? So again, it starts with the students, and I think it's Holt who is saying, you know, it's doing, right? It's action. Of course, that's Dewey as well. Self-directed, purposeful, meaningful life and work. So I had 3 research questions then. How does the pedagogy of care create a learning culture? What happens when using a constructivist approach? And to what extent did giving the students some more self-direction have an impact on their learning experiences? The data I used for this were my journals and notes that I made throughout that year, the research that I was doing, responding to student work or the reflections that they were making, and a report that I made at the end of that year. From the students, I was using the learning reflections that they were writing about their own learning that year, the planning documents that they made, and they did. I'm just thinking there were a number of them who were making connections to the curriculum. Some of them, you know, those who are that certain type, they had their spreadsheets and everything in order to do that. And then I had a focus group with some of the students. There were 7 who ended up participating in the study here, and then did some follow-up interviews with them. Now, in analyzing that data, if I'm saying this is a complex, crazy thing like a rhizome that goes off in all directions, how do you go about analyzing data like that? And I struggled with this for a long time, but I had a wonderful advisor, and in discussion with her, because I kept talking about this rhizome thing, she's like, well, why don't you do it that way? And there has been some research done that way, but not a whole lot. But what Cormier is saying is that rhizome is about uncertainty, and of course learning is an uncertain thing. But what he's saying is, if we're losing a canon here of this is what we must have, this is what we must do, now we're on the edge, and it's fluid, and you know, if knowledge is a moving target, how do we go about nailing that down? So essentially what it was mapping connections. So how do I connect different things that people are saying? And so the focus is on what's being made or could possibly being made. We weren't mapping, or we weren't comparing it to something else. Deleuze and Guattari's work, they talk about, you know, when you get an idea, and I think someone was even talking before downstairs, you know, going down the rabbit hole or something like that. Those are those lines of flight where you're all of a sudden, oh yeah, I've got an idea, and it's way over there. And they can go in any direction, and of course we're trying to figure out how to stay on task, but hey, that's really interesting. Super difficult now with the internet because you find something interesting, you click on a link, you're on the next link, you're on the next link, and who knows where you end up. And that was of course a challenge for the kids, but at least there's possibilities there. So when I was analyzing the data, I was at least looking at, well, we got to go fast here. Let's actually get to some of it, okay? So I used the students' data in order to get at the section headings. This is not a surprising central idea, right? School's boring, let me get on. But here's an interesting one, especially with our government education people here. One student said, the things I chose to do in the program were things that I was interested in, but they're not the things I was most interested in. when they said to me, you can choose anything it is that you want to learn, I thought to myself, that's not really true, because some things the province of Manitoba will not recognize. I don't know if that's true, but at least that was a feeling that the student had. Another good one was, it's hard to know what to do with information when you don't have any reason for learning it in the first place. And so for the students, there was this tension between assumptions that they had and that I had, but for them too. The assumptions that they had about what learning was and what you do it for. What I was doing actually mattered. So it certainly came out the idea of the caring. And part of that caring, at least the students said, was there was a safe environment that had been created there. And mattering for them also meant about their work. They cared about their work, and they worked hard at it because it was theirs and they had ownership of it. One of the things you mentioned, finishing projects or something like that, even in terms of assessment. Well, what happens again, if it's like a rhizome, there are these ruptures, right? And there are many kids who start off in one project and then they're like, yeah, that's not what I really want to do, and it's half done, and then they move on to something else. And so do we say, no, you must finish it, or do we say, okay, that's how life works sometimes, and we're just learning here, we're not trying to produce something, so go on. And for me, that was also part of caring. Learning isn't linear. That's obvious. I'm going to keep going because time is short here. So here's this idea that came up with the students many times, right? Feel like I haven't accomplished anything because I don't have a mark in front of me or physical evidence of my learning. I didn't give the kids marks, and for most of them, even on the first term, we agreed and made it clear with the parents, we're not putting marks on this stuff. We're learning, we're experimenting with ideas. At the end, when we need a grade for a report card, we'll come up with it then, but we're not stopping the learning to measure it in the middle of doing the work. Let's keep going here. I like this one. I'm learning this for me and not for you. I even had a student this year, 2 weeks ago, told me, I don't need you. And I thought, good. I'm fine with that. If you feel that you're at the point where you can do stuff and figure some stuff out for yourself, that's great. The biggest thing that comes out of this, though, I'm learning this for me and not for you, is that, and it continues over the years, the kids learn about themselves. That's number one. It's not just that they're doing their own thing. It comes back to that who am I? And what we heard in the presentation this morning, brain development, attachment, caring, belonging, extremely important. And I certainly saw that happening with these students. This is interesting too. I know we had a lot of discussions about what is education and why are we doing this and do we have to do it. And in that way, we were both part of the learning together. For myself, one of the questions that I kept asking myself is, what am I doing differently here? So if this isn't different than what you're doing in a regular classroom, why don't we just stay in a regular classroom? So I have to do something different. But I don't know how to do anything different because I've always only done the stuff that I've done in the classroom. So huge struggle to do that. So what are the implications? I'm thinking, can we support a kind of a learn what you want, where and when you want in a public school and still earn some credits for graduation? Can another concept of learning work with the current dominant one? Certainly discover that students need to know that they matter. Teachers have to embrace ambiguity and uncertainty, which is very difficult. Teacher is still super central, but a very different role, and of course it's going to take some serious PD in order to get people there. Teachers have to see themselves as learners, and when you're asking kids what do you want to learn, one of the things I found is how do I get kids to learn together, right? That social aspect of learning was being missed out there. So just gonna keep flipping here. Possibilities for change, or say, yeah, we need action, but of course the energy is going to be required by the people doing that. So in the end, I kind of think we need to have, or could we have, an approved learning environment design that allows for some alternative, innovative, just-in-time, learner-constructed curriculum, and that we certify it. Elliot Washer, who again was part of Big Picture Learning, put out a book last year called Leaving to Learn. And he talks about, why don't we credit kids for the stuff that they're doing outside? They're doing all this other learning, but if you take dance outside but not dance in the school, you can't get a dance credit because that's on your own time. So, interesting notion. So, moving into a conclusion here. This journey of empowering and enabling learners has profoundly transformed my own learning. When I texted participants earlier this week to let them know I'd be sharing their stories, one response came, that time we spent figuring out our life in the cave. That's what this little 17 by 17 foot room, like a grooming room. We had it before it was turned into a grooming room. That's where we were squished into. He said that was some of the most remarkable moments of my high school career. Now, when people ask me, what do? I find myself struggling to say teach, because I spend most of my day listening and observing. When I tell them that I work to make a space where young people can pursue their interests and passions, the responses are usually, man, I wish they had that when I was in school. Or the other one from a number of parents, particularly of boys, is, how can I get my kid in there? So there's a desire there. What I haven't figured out yet is how to maybe inspire others to transform their pedagogy, maybe add in some hudagogy, some self-determined learning. So hopefully the sharing of my learning journey here will be an encouragement for other educators to take that risk in their practice. So let me know where you see yourself in my story, so we can connect and build our shared knowledge and transform learning. I invite any questions, even though I know time is pretty much up.
Do you think this could work in a traditional school setting, in a classroom that's very content-based, like say Canadian history or like biology, like where there's, and not in an alternative setting? In a regular
I think so. It's sort of probably that some of the dynamism. I mean, when you say Canadian history, I think of Matt Henderson and the work that he does. And they're not just reading out of a textbook and doing whatever. They're doing a whole lot of active work. They're working within the community. They're paying attention to what's going on with those issues now and today, and they're dealing with them. So I think that's happening there. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I think when it comes to things like pre-cal, how do you do that? It's so theoretical. I know there's a man by the name of Sean Cornally. Forget the name of their new school. He started something in the States as well, and he's coming at it from a math teacher's perspective, and he's approaching things like pre-cal in a very different way. He starts with ideas and different things, and then comes to the theories, and then says, oh, there's the textbook, and you can do a few questions, right? So I think part of it is at least pushing ourselves to see how could we actually do this thing differently. We're so used to doing everything the same way we've always done it. We can't imagine even like math, that could you do pre-cal differently? Well, of course not, right? You write it out on an overhead or whatever, and then kids do it, and then they do the questions, and then you check to see if they got them right. I don't know. I'm not a math teacher, but
if you're thinking constructivist, then you can probably when you're doing something like pre-calculus, you can probably come up with a context and use the context to ask questions to prompt and probe out of the students' definition of the concept, so that about the only thing you have to say at the end of an exercise like that is, this is referred to as such and such, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we could there's one of the problems, and I've seen this before with these forums, is that the time periods are not adequate to give proper attention to the stuff.
discussion,
So
yeah.
you've done a great job. I'm sure some people might want to follow up with you a little bit more, Barry.
Sure.
So I'm reinforced by when I first looked at this and thought it was about creating spaces for learning. It was physical, and then I said, no, it can't be. It's about emotional. And now of course, I know that's true because the 3 hours of learning. Relationships, relevance, and rigor. That's in that cave, is it?
Yeah.
And I guess the other thing that I'm reminded about is teachers that you've reminded me about. And I've been in education a long time, and one of the most important things I ever heard was that education is not about filling a pail; it's about lighting a fire.
Mhm.
You've heard that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously, this is what you're doing. So
Yeah.
let's thank Barry for his presentation today.
Thank you.
And again.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you.